The Anawalt Taylor House was originally built by Samuel Anawalt, Esquire, in the 1850s, the peak of the boat-building era throughout the Monongahela Valley. During that time, he worked as a ship's carpenter in the local shipyard. By 1853, he was a captain and veteran boat builder in charge of the boatyard. In that decade, river activities dominated many local towns. By 1857, half of the boats afloat on the Mississippi River system had been built in about 7 Monongahela Valley towns, including Monongahela City. The Anawalts sold the home to Joseph B. Taylor, a steamboat engineer, and his wife, Mary Hart Taylor. The early history associated with this house comes from a letter contributed by Joseph Taylor Armstrong, Joseph B. Taylor's nephew, to the Old Home Week Association in 1908.
I remember well the canal boat trip to Pittsburgh, where we remained for a few days, then going on board the steamboat Luzerne with my uncle, aunt, and Fanny. We 2 children were put in charge of Aunt Hannah, the popular old Negro chambermaid of the boat, and in due time arrived at Monongahela. I can see it all now. After 54 years have passed, the wharf, paved with the big cobblestones that seemed like human faces to my young eyes, the old mill, the greetings of the people to meet us, and walking down through the town to my new home, and the excitement of the journey was over. The following year, my uncle purchased the house owned and built by the Anawalt family, of whom there were several members. The boys became prominent steamboat men on the lower rivers. The house referred to was one of the substantial dwellings of the town.
At that time, this area was about 2 blocks outside the borough limits. At the same time, William Ralph, a teamster and coal dealer, and later an African Methodist Episcopal evangelist, lived in a small house just outside the borough line. Ralph operated the area's Underground Railroad activities together with Mrs. J.B. Taylor, hiding the slaves in Mrs. Taylor's barn, apparently because it was beyond the domain of the borough police. The route paralleled the Monongahela River, which was one of the few streams flowing north out of pre-Civil War slave states. They passed through the Westland meeting area, following its circuitous route through hilly farm country to Monongahela City, and then across the river, probably to avoid what is now Jefferson Borough, Allegheny County, site of Virginia's Yakagania Courthouse in the 18th century, where some surrounding farmers were still pro-Virginia or Copperheads. The Taylor family was originally from the Westland meeting area. The only documentation of the Underground Railroad activity in Monongahela City comes from a later passage from the same letter as follows.
Previous to the Civil War, the question of slavery was interesting to the people of Monongahela, as much as in any other sections of the country. I am sure from what I remember, the anti-slavery people were in the majority and have always remained so. This condition of the sentiment of the people was, I think, remarkable at that time, and I can only attribute the radical view of the slavery question to the superior intelligence of the community, which subsequent events have proven their judgment was right. The late Reverend William Ralph was the representative Negro of the town for 50 years, a man of gigantic frame and great strength with a character above reproach. He occupied a prominent place in the Bethel AME Church and lived to be a great age, a highly respected man in the extensive circle of his acquaintances. Many years of his life he was in the coal delivering business, and my strong-minded aunt, Mrs. J.B. Taylor, was one of his customers. At that time, I was a boy of 10 or 11 years of age and became the confidential friend of Ralph, which continued until his death. My aunt was a violent abolitionist of the outspoken kind, and few who differed with her cared to measure words with her on that subject, as they would be sure to give up and leave the field. Stories of runaway slaves were common, and they were often seen passing through or near the town, but I had never come in contact with one. I remember on one occasion I thought my aunt was a long time on the porch settling a coal bill with Ralph. I thought their talk had something to do with me, but I was sure I had not thrown any stones down Granny Ralph's kitchen chimney for a long time, and I was punished for that. There was nothing on the docket from that source. However, when the night came on, I was made acquainted with the subject of that mysterious conversation and promises of eternal death if I betrayed them. I'm glad to say those promises were kept long years after it was necessary to keep them. 2 Negro men were brought to our stable that night by Ralph and secreted into our hayloft. They remained all night and the next day, and the following night I got a skiff and landed them on the other side of the river, where a tall man met and took them in charge, and started up the hill with them, at the same time telling me to return home. This I did, but the mystery and the quiet of the whole thing impressed me, as if something great had been done, and I was unable to decide if it were right or wrong. I fully understood that I was possessor of a great secret, and after a great many years I realized the importance of the incident. I am sure there were many others who helped the Negro man along, and this was called the Underground Railroad to Canada and to freedom.